created here, and I didn't know it, really not, and it is must in the right way, used in the proper way. LSD is not a dangerous compound. It is very, very dangerous if used uncautiously and without respecting his very, very deep influence on the psyche, even on consciousness.
But LSD was being used incautiously by very many people. Legislation became inevitable.
This year I will propose a Drug Control Act to provide stricter penalties for those who traffic in LSD and other dangerous drugs with our people.
In 1968, President Johnson took stern measures.
The time has come to stop the sale of slavery to the young.
Laws were passed in America and around the world, banning LSD and declaring it to have no medical value.
There's 27,000 people a year killed here in alcohol-related deaths. You don't see any big thing about alcohol being evil. There's how many people smoking and dying of it? How many of all of these, and yet nobody's been killed? Why is it that people think it's so evil? What is it about it that scares people so deeply? Even the guy that invented it, what is it? Because they're afraid that there's more to reality than they have confronted, that there are doors that they're afraid to go in, and they don't want us to go in there either, because if we go in, we might learn something that they don't know, and that makes us a little out of their control.
Did the establishment proscribe LSD because it revealed to the young a truth better concealed? Lord William Deeds, former MP and editor of the Daily Telegraph, sat on a committee that advised the British government to ban LSD. He denies metaphysical paranoia was involved.
We're talking of the 60s, when all these things were felt and thought and shared. And exactly the same arguments were advanced on the subject of cannabis, that in a sense it was part of an attack on youth culture, that middle-aged people drank and smoked, and young people were forbidden to use LSD and other. The difference, of course, is the dangers to society that those subjects respectively pose. And in our mind then, and in my mind now, LSD posed an element of risk which exceeded any other of the indulgences which civilizations were taking on board. There was no attack on young people. There was no political motive. It was founded on medical advice.
As well as the medical dangers, the committee in their report considered and then dismissed the possible spiritual benefits of LSD.
I find it very hard to accept that LSD offers what we could seriously call a religious or a spiritual experience. It can offer a transcendental experience. It can take you outside a sphere which you normally can think in or you live in. But to relate that directly to religious belief, to religious revelation, if you like, should be taken with a pinch of salt.
Few deny the reality of the psychedelic vision, but many doubt its worth. Is there anything of value to be found in the hallucinatory, irrational realm of LSD intoxication?
The common way we think about the nature of the human mind is that it is either sane or insane. LSD hints to us that there is an area of the mind which could be called unsane, beyond sanity, and yet not insane. Think of a circle with a fine split in it. At one end is insanity. You go around the circle to sanity, and on the other end of the circle, close to insanity, but not insanity, is unsanity. This is perhaps where all the superlative efforts of humanity come from, not only of art, but of science. And it may be that we could approach it by a thoughtful, wise study of LSD.
Today, the suggestion that there may be a good side to LSD could hardly be less fashionable by sordid associations with criminal exploitation. and wasted lives. Some blame LSD for glamorizing drug taking, paving the way for today's more deadly addictions.
Heroin? I don't know what all this fuss is about. I could handle it. Okay, so I do heroin a bit now. But I can control it. I could stop. If I wanted to. There's no way I'm going to become an addict. I just do heroin. It's no problem. Look, I've got this thing under control. Just got a touch of fluidate.
Everyone thinks they can control heroin until it starts to control them.
I could give up tomorrow, couldn't I?
We've got to make a distinction between heroin, which is a drug which creates physical dependence, and LSD, which is a drug which has no physical dependence. And I don't believe you can make a link between the use of LSD in the 1960s and 1970s with the use of heroin and other drugs like that in the 1980s. In the 1960s and 70s, people were using drugs like LSD believing that it was a means of gaining greater self-awareness, greater insight into their own being. In the 1980s, people are using drugs like LSD as a means of escaping reality, of avoiding the unpleasantness of life. Of course, in a sense, it doesn't really matter what reasons people have for using it. What does matter is that LSD is an extraordinarily powerful drug whose effects we can't really control, and we can't control when we take it. It creates so many risks for both those who use it and for society generally that I believe we've got no choice but to retain legal controls on its use.
Aldous Huxley, whose early experiments with mescaline influenced popular interest in LSD, never lost faith in the value of psychedelic drugs. On the day he died from cancer in 1963, Huxley asked his second wife, Laura, to inject him with LSD.
It was the same day that President Kennedy was assassinated. And we were right here in this room. It was then his room, and he was getting very weak. And he said to me, give me a big, big piece of paper. And he wrote intramuscular, 100 microgram of LSD intramuscular. And I filled the syringe with it, and I gave it to him. It was very quiet. At a certain point I said, if you hear me, squeeze my hand, and he did, very weakly. Then I thought, I had the impression that maybe it was necessary to give a second shot, and I asked him, he indicated. So I gave him a second shot, and that, well, then it was about 4 or 5 hours where there was absolutely no jolt, no agitation, nothing, except this very, very quiet, like a music that becomes less and less audible, like fading away. There was no jolt when he died. It was just that breath stopped, and there was a beautiful expression in the face. There was a very beautiful expression in the face.
When Huxley died in 1963, LSD was already beginning its descent into notoriety, and the advocates of Albert Hofmann's discovery were claiming for it the status of a religious sacrament.
I think that many of the intellectuals of the 60s were really failed priests. There are people who are looking for a priestly role in society, and in another age they would perhaps have joined a church and subjected themselves to the discipline of a church. But they, of course, didn't have the necessary transcendental belief or the necessary